Warning, some viewers may find the following footage deeply disturbing.
You're a fucking genius.
Hey, this is Kurt Wallace, and we have Scott Horton with us. He is the author of Provoked. And go to scotthorton.org to buy the book. Check out everything Scott Horton at scotthorton.org, and definitely buy the book. And you're going to want to buy the book after you hear what he has to say today. Okay. And just to get a little bit of a baseline, Scott, thank you for joining us today and sharing a little bit about American history and Russian history and history around this conflict with Ukraine and Russia.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back with you, Kurt.
So let's talk about, in terms of where we are today, 3 years in on this Ukraine war with Russia, hundreds of thousands of deaths. According to a recent poll, the Ukrainians, and the poll is from the Social Monitoring Center, the Ukrainians, 60% of Ukrainians do not want Zelensky to run for president again. Only 16% would vote for him if they held an election, which they cannot hold because he's declared martial law in Ukraine. Over 100,000 Ukrainian troops have defected. They're actually charged with Ukrainian desertion laws, and they're fleeing prosecution right now. So things are not going well in Ukraine, and the attitude and the pride or the effort to curate a fight by the Ukrainians is waning. And of course, at this point, Joe Biden has authorized missile attacks in Russia, and the Russians are enraged. Russian people it's inciting anger, and they are calling for war against the United States. We're in a kind of a horrible position at this point with all of the tinkering that's been going on. But this tinkering didn't just start with Joe Biden. So looking forward to kind of talking through this. One last thing. This is December 3rd, 2024. And today Putin stated that Russia wants a total Ukrainian capitulation, total surrender, and he's not interested in negotiating a peace agreement, and he's demanding 4 provinces in Ukraine. So let's first address any kind of disinformation, because there's lots of things that you see on the internet and mainstream media that aren't true. Scott, would you give the listeners some context as to what, as a kind of a 101 basis on what Russia's interest is in the Donbass region, and include some information history around the Minsk agreements as well? And we'll talk about NATO. I have questions for you around NATO, but just want to get clarification around kind of the Crimea Peninsula and paint a picture of what's going down.
Okay. Well, so first of all, I'm not aware of Putin's statement today. I hadn't had a chance to see that yet, so I can't really comment on that, although it's not surprising as you sum it up that he's saying, no, I already declared that I'm taking these 4 provinces. And as I've said, I don't think he's giving them up. He's think maybe it'd be like, well, maybe we can keep 2 and get back 2. But no, that's the so-called land bridge to Crimea and guarantees fresh water from the Dnieper. It was a huge mistake by the Kiev government to shut off the little canal, the ditch that they had created to divert water from the Dnieper River down to Crimea. And in doing so, they gave the Russians a major motive to have to control all that territory from now on to guarantee that water supply. So I think that, as you said, paraphrasing him, that they already lost. That ship has sailed. And it's good news that he said 4. If I heard you quote right, he said
He did.
4,
He
not
said 4.
5, because he could say, you know what, I've decided I want Kharkiv, and I've decided I want Odessa. That'd be 6. So he's not saying that. Great. That's pretty reasonable, consider all of the things, in consideration here. Anyway, I mean, I don't know what that means for Trump's, alleged diplomacy, whatever he was planning on doing. I mean, the reality is the Ukrainians have lost. The Russians are in the position of strength. Trump doesn't really have any cards to play in this thing. So when the inevitable backstab comes, which is America insisting that Kiev go to the table and figure something out, don't blame the new guy. It really is Joe Biden's fault for, pushing these people into a fight that they couldn't possibly win. And, as Boris Johnson said the other day, this is a proxy war. This isn't really about Ukraine at all. This is about America using the Ukrainians as a bludgeon to hurt the Russians. Sort of like the Reuters headline today. The Americans told Assad, listen, we'll call off these Al-Qaeda terrorists if you'll just break ties with Iran and Hezbollah. Oh, but I thought that the only reason you back Al-Qaeda against Assad is because you love the people of Syria so much and you're trying to protect them from the evil dictator. And now you say right there in the headline, as long as you'll just finally do what David Wormser fantasized you would do 30 years ago, if we only invaded Iraq, and break your ties with Hezbollah and Iran, we'll let you live. Otherwise, we're sending in legions of suicide bombers. Yeah, there it is, plain as day. All this stuff about defending Ukraine. We just stipulated they lost 4 provinces. Doesn't sound like we defended them very well. And as everyone has known from the very beginning, anyone who is critical of this, not just a parroting puppet of the media line, knew that the longer the war goes on, the worse position the Ukrainians are in. All this hype about how they're going to force the Russians all the way out and they're going to retake all their land back to 2014, 2013 borders and Crimea too. Every last inch, they all said over and over again. Anybody could tell you that that was a complete hoax. That was never going to happen. And really, if you read carefully, even the administration and their, leakers and officials and off the record sources and whoever would indicate that no, I mean, the plan is to keep the war going longer. Well, a quick defeat, assuming that was even possible, then keep the war going longer. And you don't even have to be like the greatest military expert in Ukraine's order of battle to just see, as Kamala Harris said, Russia is a bigger country and they have the advantage economically speaking and in terms of manpower, in terms of warehouses full of old Soviet bombs and whatever that they need to wage the war. And that what it would really take to reverse the war would be real Western intervention. In other words, the U.S. Navy, Army and Marine Corps, U.S. Air Force, picking targets and killing Russians and forcing them out. And Joe Biden never was going to do that. And Lord, if there is one, please pray that he prevents Donald Trump from ever even considering going down that path. We cannot have NATO forces on the ground. I mean, we got some special operators and spies, but you're talking about the 82nd Airborne? Nuh-uh, man. It's nuclear war if we do that. And everybody knows that. Joe Biden said at the beginning of this, we're not putting the U.S. Army there. You can forget that. And I'm not even holding that in reserve as a threat. It's not even a threat. Putin, don't worry. I'm not putting the Army in there. Because he doesn't want us to all die in a thermonuclear war. He wants to be cute and have a proxy war short of that. And quite frankly, use the Ukrainians, their combat forces, but also their nation, and to some degree their civilian population as cannon fodder, as a sacrificial lamb on the altar of weakening Russia, which ultimately they haven't done, right? They've remilitarized Russia. They have gotten the Russians to waste a lot of money on militarism. As Austrian, economists, we're familiar with the doctrines of liberal Keynesian militarism, or military Keynesianism, I guess I mean to say, where, oh yeah, you boosted aggregate demand, spending government money on your military industrial complex, but that's not real capitalism. That's not real production of goods and services for people. And it's a net loss in wealth. So they'll have a temporary boost for a while, and then they'll pay the price over the long term. On the other
global
hand,
socialism. Any kind of war is socialism in this respect, for sure.
Yeah.
And
On the
so
other
it's
hand,
just redistribution of wealth from
as much as
taxpayers and
America,
borrowed money to military industrial complex.
but as much as America's kicked them out of Europe, they've turned toward Asia, and they've increased their trading relationship with the other nations of Asia in a way that may very well make up for it. I mean, Russia's got nothing but resources, timber and energy, basically, fresh water if it comes down to that. But right now they're selling oil, gas, and timber and making a killing on that. And they got all you can eat.
Why did they go in? Why did Russia go in? What is the I'm trying to get to the 101 because everything that you
So
wrote in the book is very deep and thoughtful, and it's a
the
lot of
bottom
research.
line is
But
the
why did
bottom
they
line
go in?
is
Yeah.
Putin wanted Biden to sign a treaty promising official permanent neutrality for Ukraine and the forswearing by NATO of their eventual membership in the military alliance. And he wanted it in writing as well and
Mhm.
in a treaty that
Okay.
we would not put missile defense systems in Ukraine. And this is a huge controversy, as I explained in Romania and Poland in the previous missile systems that they've installed there, is the Mark 41 missile launcher, MK 41 missile launcher, is a dual use launcher. You can shoot Sparrow anti ballistic missiles out of it, but you can also fire Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be tipped with hydrogen bombs. And so Putin had said clearly going back to 1997, or pardon me, 2007, that he just considers this a dire threat, the risk that America would go so far. And so what they've done, especially, and this goes back, but in the first year of Biden in 21, they essentially increased what they call the interoperability of, building up Ukraine's military to work with the NATO alliance and America's military hardware, NATO standardization of not just their weapons, but their policies and procedures and command and control structures and communications equipment and all of this stuff, essentially making them de facto members of NATO without the full scale Article 5 war guarantee,
Now,
but building them up to be everything but a full-fledged member of NATO.
now,
And
were they doing that um, overtly, or was that the CIA? With
no,
the
yes, it was
CIA
over.
embedded?
No. It was right there on the front page of the Times.
Okay, so
And
what
see,
was the
from the point
CIA
of view,
doing at that time?
let's be charitable to Biden here, man. I'm not saying he was trying to start a war.
Okay.
But the thing is, like all these people, and this goes for the Russians too, to a great degree, I guess. A lot of their thinking is two-dimensional type thing here. So Biden, you picture Biden and his goons in a room trying to figure out what to do here. And the answer is be tough. Don't back down. If they say that they're all upset about NATO expansion, well, then we should have the State Department and the Defense Department put out a thing saying, you're damn right. We still stand by our previous pledge that we stand with our friends and we'll never back down. And you sure as hell can't tell us who can be in our alliance or not and all these things, right? Because what's the alternative? The alternative is saying, oh, geez, whatever you say, Mr. Hitler, here, just have Czechoslovakia, right? In the mind of the Democrats and the mind of Joe Biden and his people, that's your choice. You're either Chamberlain or you're Churchill, right? You're either, Hoover or you're FDR. And so he's got to be FDR and face down the evil aggressor. So, but meanwhile, like, what's he doing? He's just telling Putin, you really have no choice but to go ahead and follow through. That's the real message that's coming through, is that when it comes down to it, you're running out of time. America's putting him in a situation where he believes, and I'm paraphrasing, there's a scholar from England who wrote a great study about this, and I believe the title was, at least the subtitle was, Now or Never. That America was making the Russians decide that, well, my choice is fight them now or fight a much harder war against them later. Because as America's militarizing them, it's not enough to deter Russia yet. I don't know what we'd have to give them some Navy destroyers or what we're going to give them to actually deter Russia from trying. But it's enough to provoke them into going ahead and doing it now instead of putting it off. And that was essentially the dynamic. And, you listen to some of these college boys talk about it. No offense, I'm just being cute. But like Stephen Walt from Harvard says, listen, you're supposed to be applying the spiral model, not the deterrence model. You're on the wrong page of the textbook. He's actually the one who's trying to deter us, and it's failed. And now we're on a spiral. Now he's paranoid and believes he's defending himself and reacting. And we believe we're defending ourselves and reacting, or defending our friends and reacting. But meanwhile, both of us are actually climbing the ladder of escalation toward war here. When you see what I mean? Like, I didn't go to Georgetown, whatever, how you're supposed to, but they have all their jargon for it, right? They have a model. with a little graph, like a drawing in the textbook. What's the spiral model look like? It probably has like a little diagram on it and crap, right? Like they already have a way of thinking about this systematically. And Walt is saying, dude, you're on the wrong page of the textbook. It's not a deterrence model here. It's a spiral model. And you're playing the wrong role in the game because you're playing the wrong game and help lead to war. And so if you go back to the end of 21, what were they saying? They were saying, you better not do it. And if you do, we're going to make life really tough for you. We're going to help the Ukrainians to whoop up on you until you give up and turn around. They were not saying, hey, you know what? You've got some good points. Let's sit down and hash this out. You know, Biden said on the phone, you know how when Biden says something and then the White House walks it back and you don't know, like, who is that? Jake Sullivan? We don't know. Well, Biden, the president, said on the phone to the Russian president on December the 30th, listen, you know, we're not going to sign a treaty about, I don't know if he said this exactly, but certainly it was not in there that, oh, we'll sign a treaty regarding neutrality and forswear NATO membership forever. He didn't promise that. But he did say, we can definitely work out a deal on the missiles and we can come to understandings. And he said, listen, we have no intention, Vlad, come on. We have no intention of bringing Ukraine into NATO anytime in the next 10 years. Nobody thinks that their democracy or their market capitalist system is up to snuff. It's completely corrupt and beyond, way beyond EU rules. Like, no, you may not join. You cannot be part of the West when your system is this completely bent. No way. So Vlad, trust me, man. It's cool. We're not going to do it in the next 10 years. And yeah, we can sign a thing on the missiles. But then what did he do? He blew them off on the missiles. He sent Wendy Sherman, and Wendy Sherman was like, nah. Maybe we'll do a thing later and we'll have a side meeting at the end of the thing. But then they didn't, and they didn't do it. They refused to truly operate in good faith. And Biden's guy, Derek Chollet, later said that when it came to NATO, the only thing we would say about NATO that they were instructed to say about NATO is a defensive organization. So you have no reason to worry. And hey, if you're a paranoid schizophrenic and you're going to blow up the whole world over it, well, that's just your problem because you heard me. It's a defensive organization. Now, yes, it's true. They invaded Serbia and Afghanistan and Libya. And, in Afghanistan, they have this pretended loophole, but it was Al-Qaeda in Nangarhar province, not the Taliban in Kabul that did that attack. And they knew that good and well. So that's just a bait and switch war anyway. And then Serbia and Libya, don't try my patience. Right? These are aggressive wars, period. There's no way in the world that you could call that a purely defensive alliance. But that was the line, was, look, you heard me. I don't mean you any harm. Yes, I'm surrounding your country with new members of my NATO alliance. Yes, everyone knows you can never join. It's at your expense. This is all about you. We didn't erase the dividing lines in Europe. We just moved them east. And yes, we seem to be trying to achieve a first strike capability against you with these dual-use missile launchers that can fire nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. And we're not willing to negotiate in good faith because it's fair to infer, right? This isn't like total crazy conspiracy thinking. It's fair to infer that plan B, or maybe even plan like A2, was go ahead and let them invade. They did not seem to be so against the idea of Russia invading. And you saw that the immediate reaction was surprising. Even if you're like a jaded foreign policy type, you go, well, look, a hot war on Russia's very border, ceasefire, right? Like somebody figure out something. Send in people from Pango and South Korea and wherever who have no dog in this fight, Ireland, I don't care, to come and negotiate a peace, right? Like, what are we doing? We can't have a war here. But what do the Americans say? Well, we're just going to send in more weapons.
We're going to protect Ukraine.
Yeah, and Ryan Grimm, the reporter Ryan Grimm at the State Department briefing.
Protect democracy. This is the end of democracy. Zelensky's campaign has been 100% to try to coerce people into believing that this is a war on democracy.
Well, and yeah, to whatever degree that's worked out for
Didn't
them.
work. Uh,
Uh,
And yeah,
but the Americans clearly, I'm not saying their plan A was they wanted the war. I think plan A was to intimidate Putin, that this would be a major mistake on your part, pal. Don't do it. But I wouldn't even maybe go so far as call it plan B. Plan like A parentheses one or two was, go ahead and do it because we'll bog you down and bleed you to bankruptcy on the 1980s Rambo 3 Afghan model, Operation Cyclone model, and ultimately you'll regret it. And then, but now here we are, as you said, it's not quite 3 years later, and the Russians are saying, well, look, we're not settling for less than the land we've already taken. So whatever, there's no negotiation. You can just sign at the bottom line of our deal we're offering to you. That's it. Right?
you know, Scott, your book Provoked. When I read the title, the first thing I thought of is Poke the Bear. And let's kind of talk through book a little bit to give some context in the history of what's happened and the different players in it, who provoked and why did they provoke, and um, starting with let's go back.
I
Yep.
need to practice doing the fast version of this. So thank you for
Yeah,
asking it that way. I'm going to try to do
sure,
it very bullet
sure.
pointy for you. I mean,
Okay.
basically, the answer is this: when the Soviet Union fell apart, the American empire did not. America built this vast system to contain the Soviet Union. And then when it ceased to exist, they just kept right on expanding. And the choice was not just, oh, listen to Ron Paul or listen to everyone else, right? There were plenty of people in
Pat
the
Buchanan,
foreign
in your
policy
book, you
establishment.
Mhm.
And not even just Pat, because you could say, well, Pat's Pat and only represents some faction of the Republicans or something, but not even
portion of
him.
the
Like,
CFR as well.
yes, yes, like the actual gray bearded members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Rockefeller men, many of them, many of like the leading senators said, hey, it's time to come home. We should not be doing this. Generals and admirals and foreign service officers said, let's come home now. And in fact, there were many Cold Warriors who were shocked to realize that we're not coming home, like Chalmers Johnson, who you may remember wrote Sorrows of Empire and Nemesis. Back in the Bush years. He had been a Cold Warrior hawk, professor at USC, and a contract analyst at the CIA. And he said, okay, we whooped them commies. Now we can come home. And then that didn't happen. And he went, oh, wait a minute, and had to kind of reevaluate what system he had helped to build here, what it was really all about. So then, as we know, and more people are familiar with this,
And what
uh,
was it really all about? Talk a little bit about the new conservative agenda in that.
well, the neoconservatives come later, but the initial agenda at the end of the Second World War was, and you can read this, one great example would be in NSC 1968, or pardon me, NSC 68, which was written in 40, I'm sorry, 47 or 48. Anyway, it's by Paul Nitze, and it's bad economics. It basically says America has to be a world empire in order to guarantee access to all these resources in the world that we want and all this stuff. And remember, during World War II, the whole world, the whole industrialized world was destroyed except for the United States. So America, I don't know the exact number, but it was something like 2/3 of all global GDP came out of the middle part of North America for the first little while there, the first decade or so after the Second World War. So when it came to building a world empire, the USA could do it, and nobody could stand in our way except for the communists. So in the Soviet Union and in China, they essentially had their own empires and were able to keep us away. And then so that was the whole Cold War history, was preventing them from expanding while also expanding on our own side.
Okay.
But then look, and you can say, and I don't argue this in the book, and I'm not a historian of this era, and I don't know nearly enough about it, but like just take for granted that all that really was about protecting the world from Soviet communism. Fine. But then in the process, they built this massive military machine. And quite frankly, like it's worth pointing out, it's worth going back to and revisiting, I guess, for people, even though
What's the
it's kind
point
of
of
101.
bombs and
But
all that military equipment if you're not going to use it?
well, that's right. And look, Ike Eisenhower, who was a two-term Republican president, who had been a five-star general, the highest ranking American Army officer who led UN forces in Europe in World War II against the Germans. He's the one who coined the phrase, military industrial complex. It was his last day in office after an 8-year term. And he was essentially saying, good luck, everybody else. I could only do what I could do to restrain these guys while I was in there. There's another quote of him saying, God help the next president that doesn't have the experience with the army that I have. Because he was tough enough that he could just put his foot down and say, I'm Mike Eisenhower, damn it, obey me. And they would go, okay, sorry, and kind of back down. The next guy got a bullet to the head. A lot of people think it was the army that killed him. Like, no, you don't get to tell us no, dude. We do what we want to do. They are the empire. And if the president is a threat to national security, well, then they'll just take care of that. So when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, a lot of them, and this was like apocryphal at the time, kind of everybody knew, they were lost at sea. They didn't know what to do. They had a crisis of confidence. They were like, they remember, if you're old enough, remember they said, oh, maybe the Germans and the Japanese are going to come back and take over. And they couldn't figure out how that was going to happen. But they had to come up with something because it can't just be that we have to give up our militarism and do nothing to replace it, right? Like they just couldn't be part of the argument. So then, and look, we are talking about government programs, including the NATO bureaucracy itself. It's not just a treaty, a piece of paper, an agreement. It's a institution.
Can you talk about that in the 90s with Clinton, Yeltsin,
sure,
expanding NATO,
and even starting with Bush? They went to Bosnia as fast as they could, and a huge part of it was to give NATO something to do. So they helped to speed the dissolution of Yugoslavia and help force the war to break out. And they said, oh no, now we need NATO to help contain the horrible war that we caused. And it's a huge part of it. And it sounds stupid and crazy, but I'm sorry. Like, I have it all out of the horse's mouth in the book of them all talking about it over and over and over again. This was a big part of why they did what they did in Yugoslavia. It's just crazy. And then with NATO expansion, this was always the plan dating back to Bush, but then Bill Clinton implemented it. And this was absolutely at the Russians' expense. It was in violation of the solemn agreements that they had made with Bush Sr. People try to dispute this, but they can't dispute the history in my book. And I'm relying on all these scholars that came before me and did all this real work. Like Joshua.
I mean, it's amazing the work that you put into this book. And
well, I mean, Kurt, honestly, I'm not an academic, right? Like I'm a radio host. And
it's got to be incredibly I mean, I could imagine Tom Woods going through that process kind of seamlessly, but I mean, kudos to you and the effort that you put into it.
But I mean, what it really is it's a collection of a lot of other people's hard work, right? That's what it really is. It's like, these people, and I give credit where it's due. I got, more than 6,600 footnotes in there. But so like, it's not my breakthrough to say, oh, Bush Sr. was being dishonest to Gorbachev when he promised, listen, we're going to make NATO into this political organization. We're going to use the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which you and Ukraine are already members of. We're going to make that the security organization now. It's not my original insight to say that he was lying, right? It's my original insight to say it that
the New World Order,
right?
Is what he.
But it was, look, Joshua Schifrinson is a professor at Texas A&M. And he's the one who says, well, listen, these assurances were disingenuous. That's the way an academic says it, right? Like, they were shining these guys on, man, is what they were doing. So, like, all credit to Schifrinson. And look, I did go through the documents myself. I did go through a lot of primary source materials myself. But, what can I say? This guy beat me to it, did a ton of great work on it. And it's just, he's a polite, fully developed emotional character who says polite things like, well, they seemed to have been intentionally deceptive here. Whereas I'm going to just tell you that, look, George Bush was lying to the Russians, telling them what he thought they needed to hear to get the hell out of his way. And then the same thing continued with Bill Clinton. I mean, if I tell you Bill Clinton's the worst liar in the world, you're like, yeah, I already know that. But I'm like, listen, he continued the same lies he inherited from Bush Sr. You go, oh, man, it really goes back that
It doesn't
far.
matter D or R in terms of the foreign policy and this trajectory that we've gone through. So you're talking about who poked the bear. And so we're talking about Bush, talking about Clinton. Just so that we get this in there, this is something that I think is really intriguing. It's around the Clinton-backed terrorism. And that whole story and how that, describe the Russian interest in that, because uh, that's another area that, I mean, if that was happening to the United States, if Russia was sponsoring that the way that Clinton did, what would the United States do? And talk
I
about the
know.
restraint.
I
You know,
know. It
it's
is
unbelievable.
remarkable.
If people
Yeah.
demonize Russia, but restraint from that country.
Yeah.
Could you kind of
Uh,
talk about the background, the details on that a little bit, please?
well, look, in Bosnia, America was fighting for the Muslims against the Serbs. And by and large, in fighting, helped to create the Muslim and Croat coalition against the Serbs in that war. And that included a bunch of mujahideen. They started coming there as early as 1992, as soon as they were done killing the commies in Afghanistan. It was the same group. So to go back, for anybody who's ever seen Rambo 3, he's essentially fighting with Massoud and the local Afghan insurgency against the Soviets. Okay. But we all know the story. Everybody knows this. Ghost Wars, Operation Cyclone, Charlie Wilson's War. It wasn't just the Afghan Mujahideen. It was the Arab Afghan Army or the International Islamic Brigades. It wasn't just Arabs. It was primarily Arabs, but also Chechens and Filipinos and God knows who Americans, all went to Afghanistan to help fight against the Soviet Union in that war. Now, the Soviet Union, that was the plan. Give them their own Vietnam, bog them down, bleed them to bankruptcy, force them out the hard way. They did. They left in 89. The Arabs and their local friends ended up finally sacking the capital city in 1991 and killing the communist dictator then. And then they needed something to do. And they're essentially a bunch of mercenaries who know their job skills. So they go looking for other jihads to fight. And so they go to the first place they go is to Bosnia. And they had transport. I mean, the Americans were taking them there. They gave them, the Bosnian embassy in Vienna, Austria, gave them all passports and they could travel freely. And, at the very least, about, 4,000, 5,000 of them went and fought in Bosnia in that war. And this included several of the September 11th hijackers. It's the same thing for Kosovo and for Chechnya. In my previous books, I had a page where I claim this and then I give you a mess of footnotes at the bottom and then let you go on with your life. But here, no. In this book, we do whole sections on each of these. And I show you, again, showcasing everyone else's work at that time of what we knew about what these guys were doing and when and whatever. And you read in the Sunday Times where it's like CIA's bastard army ran riot around Balkans. And it's like, it's not funny what they're doing. You know what I mean? And in fact, one anecdote, and this will get the truthers all like excited, I guess. I don't know, but like they literally, the bin Ladenite Mujahideen were invading Macedonia, trying to create a greater Kosovo up until the August of 2001, just 1 month before September 11th. And these were terrorists who were bin Ladenite terrorists, just like we're seeing in Syria today, trained by the U.S. Delta Force, top tier U.S. Army Special Operations Forces had trained them. And then they were routed by Macedonian police and the Americans came and escorted them out. This is literally like 4 weeks before the September 11th attack. And so I know people go, yeah, that's because they're terrorists and America controls everything that they think and do and say. But like, yeah, I don't think that. I think this is probably a big part of the key of why they weren't watching what was happening was because they kept telling themselves, no, we like these guys. They're friends of ours and taking it for granted that they're easy and not a threat to us. But that wasn't right. And it's the same thing in Chechnya. And there's a mess of more than half of the 9/11 hijackers had fought in American-sponsored wars in Bosnia or Chechnya. More than half, like 11 of the 20, 11 of the 19 had fought there. And I, go through all the names. And that includes the guys that recruited them. It includes the guy that tried to blow up LAX airport in 99. That includes the guy who, remember, was a lone wolf attack, but who in 1993 had shot up the some guys at CIA headquarters, out front of CIA headquarters. I think he had been to Bosnia or he had been to Afghanistan. Actually, let's see, because that was in 93. I forget. It's in the book. Um, but anyway, and a bunch of the guys who recruited the 9/11 hijackers as well had been involved in these wars. And so this is like, I quote some of these terrorism experts in there and this is like from before September 11th. So they're not like quite cashing in on 9/11 fever. Then they're not really like playing a specific role for Fox News or whatever. They're just kind of being critical. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? In a
Yeah, of
pre-September
course.
11th era, but still talking about this stuff. And they're saying that, look, like what the Afghan war did for these guys in terms of coalescing them into this sort of international group of like revolutionary, Wahhabi extremist terrorist types. What Afghanistan did for them is what Bosnia did for them, only now 2,000 miles west and with a whole new generation. A bunch of the guys who had been too young to go to Afghanistan could now earn their stripes fighting in Bosnia. And that includes Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the ringleader, the primary organizer of the September 11th attacks. And now check out this story, man. I know you know, and your audience is familiar with Colleen Rowley, the great whistleblower. She was Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2002 because she was the lawyer from the FBI Minneapolis office. And it was her team that was investigating Zacharias Moussaoui, who was wrongly but popularly known as the 20th hijacker. There's another guy, Katani, was really supposed to be the 20th hijacker, I think. But anyway, he was here on a mission for Al Qaeda, and his job was to learn how to fly jumbo jets and crash them into things. And yet, the guy was such a dummy that he made it clear he wanted to learn how to fly a jumbo jet, but he wasn't really concerned with how to take off or land. And they were like, what in the world? And he was even talking about, yeah, like a jumbo jet, like a flight from Heathrow to New York. That's what I'm really interested in being able to do. Can we practice that on the simulator? And they're like, what? No, this guy. So they called.
Is this down in Florida? Is that?
This is in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Oh, in Minneapolis. Okay.
So
who are the guys in Florida?
Hold that thought.
Okay.
So this is in August of 01. And the FBI team, they're smart. One of their guys says, I think this guy wants to crash into the World Trade Center.
Smart.
Just on intuition. Look, the World Trade Center had been hit before in 93, right?
Sure. Yeah,
So
it was a bomb in
an
the
obvious
basement,
target.
right?
And the guy's talking about New York
Yeah.
City. So the guy just pictures New York in his head and goes, aha, I see what's going on here, right? Great intuition there. So they asked for a FISA warrant. Now, to get a FISA warrant on somebody, they don't need to prove that, Your Honor, we have probable cause to believe we'll find evidence of a crime. No. All they need to show is that they have a reason to believe that someone is an agent of a foreign power or of a foreign terrorist group. That's it. And then we can go fishing on your ass all day long. It's not really a criminal investigation. It's just counterintelligence or whatever, but it's within their purview. So
Senator Obama had pledged to fight against the FISA.
No, wait, no.
warrants.
You're talking about Section 702, warrantless spying, blah, blah, blah. We're not talking about that.
Sure.
We're talking about
Okay.
bare bones. Your Honor, we think this guy works for Osama bin Laden and we want to look at his computer. And Your Honor says, well, what makes you think that? And you go, well,
We just think it.
French intelligence says that his brother's a recruiter for Al Qaeda in Chechnya. Okay.
So you have
that's
to have
not-
proof at that time.
Right. So you see what I'm saying? That's not quite the Fourth Amendment hurdle there, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized, right? But Your Honor, we have reason to believe that this is a foreign terrorist tied guy.
Thanks for the clarification.
So that's under the FISA Act of 78. They can go ahead and look. However,
Okay. Yep.
Washington, D.C. would not let them go to the court to get the FISA warrant, and the court would have given it to them. But the bosses at the FBI headquarters would not let them until the afternoon of September 11th. They still, after the attack, they still wouldn't let them go until the head of the CIA said, I wonder if this has anything to do with that guy in Minneapolis. Let's look in his computer. And only then, when he asked, did they go to the court. And then what happened? They opened the computer and it directed them straight to the cell in Florida that had just died in the kamikaze attack on the towers. It would have led them straight to the plotters, the primary pilot hijackers, and rolled up the plot. That would have been the end of the September 11th plot. And why didn't they do it, dude? Colleen Rowley told the story. Why? It was because what intelligence did they have that said that Moussaoui was a terrorist? They got it from the French, and it said that he and his brother were recruiters for Al Qaeda in Chechnya. They worked for Khattab and Basayev. But the FBI said, but we like the terrorists in Chechnya. We don't consider to them to be allies of Osama bin Laden, enemies of the United States, even though they absolutely were. Had trained in Afghanistan. Both of their two top leaders were personally acquainted with bin Laden and had met with him numerous times and brought their men to Afghanistan to train with his and all of this stuff. They absolutely were bin Laden's men in Chechnya. No other way to put it, seriously. And yet they were denied their FISA warrant. They could have stopped September 11th, and it was because America was playing this double game and thinking that they could get away with it. And in fact, get this, there's an FBI agent named Ali Soufan who said that the Chechen terrorists said to bin Laden, hey, why do you hate the Americans so much? We don't understand. They helped us in Bosnia. They helped us in Kosovo. They helped us in Afghanistan. Now they're helping us in Chechnya. Why do you want to target them? And they didn't understand that bin Laden had a separate set of problems, primarily American bases in Saudi Arabia being used to bomb and blockade Iraq and support for Israel, killing children in Palestine and in Lebanon. But to the Chechens, they were like, geez, Bill Clinton's been our best guy this whole time. What's the problem? And so, but this is the problem, as I poke fun in the book that Vladimir Putin is parroting American non-interventionist talking points when he says you should not back terrorists in one place because they could pop up and bite you back, hurt you in another, which is absolutely right.
Scott, in terms of Putin and his reaction to 9/11, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that needs to be the humanity. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that Putin's a great guy or anything like that. I'm not saying that about any leader of a global government, but
it's just politics. But look, it's important.
It's politics and the relationship that he and Bush had post 9/11.
Right. Yeah. So he had been brought in to help win the Chechen war against Bill Clinton's treachery in 99 and 2000. That was how he had made his bones and became the president. And he had only been the president at that time for 2 years. So not quite 2 years. W. Bush is, of course, 8 months on the job now, 9 months on the job. So these are essentially, as we just discussed, the same terrorists that have been attacking Russia are now attacking the United States. So Putin sees an opportunity to make friends with Bush and say, listen, let's us fight these guys together. And he pledges to do anything. He's the first foreign leader to call Bush on September 11th. Says, I'm at your service. Now, remember, Kurt, it's America switching sides in the Afghan war, not Russia, right? So the Russians are more than happy to help us. Oh, you want to kill the Mujahideen there? You can use our bases in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, or was it Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and we'll give you all kinds of intelligence and advice and whatever you need to help facilitate the war, to help you win the war against these guys. And which was a huge thing. And
I mean, they're fighting the Frankenstein they created, though.
That's
I'm
right.
talking about us or the United States government.
Right. Yeah. Not the Russians. The Americans are. Yeah. And look, Putin had to face down. People talk about him like he's just the only man who lives in Russia and can just do whatever he wants. But he was the new president, and he had to face down militarists to his right in the government and say, listen, this is my decision to make, and I'm making it. I'm going to suck up to George Bush and the United States of America, try to build a friendship and a partnership here. And in other words, despite what Bill Clinton has just done in Serbia and even backing the bad guys in Chechnya and the rest, hey, it's a whole new day, man. It's a new millennium. It's a new president. It's a new massive terrorist attack on New York City and a new opportunity. I mean, you said look at it from his point of view. Look at it from his point of view.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union's gone. This is the rump Russian Federation. They don't have anything like the power and influence that they used to have. They still have problems, but they don't have near the ability to do anything about it that they used to have. America, meanwhile, has never been more powerful. America's at its absolute apex of power and authority. And Osama bin Laden just wrote them a warrant to do whatever they want for the next 10 years, 20. And they're going to cash it and do whatever they want with it, right? And so what else is he going to do? Right? Other than say, like, hey, George Bush, let's be pals, which is just exactly what he was trying to do. And I even have a quote in there of Joe Biden saying there's never been a more pro-Russian leader in all of history. I mean, a more pro-Western Russian leader in all of history than Vladimir Putin. He is trying so hard to suck up to the West. He told an interviewer, listen, eating with chopsticks is fun and everything, but we're part of Christendom. We're part of the West. We're part of European culture. And she says, you know, well, what if they won't have us? And he's like, well, you're just going to have to figure it out, because what are we going to do? Like, we're not Asian. We're Eurasian, and emphasis on the Euro for certainly the ruling class in Moscow and everything. So,
So 2000,
that was his
2001, this
intent.
relationship begins, but Bush kind of, you know, stabs him in the back with withdrawal from the anti-ballistic missile treaty. Was
That's
that
right.
in 2002? Is that right? Is it?
It's in '01. It's in December of '01, just 2 months later, 3 months later. And he tears up the
And
treaty. And it's just a scam.
yeah,
I mean, the missile defense stuff barely works at all. You couldn't
yeah,
rely on it in a real fight.
and
Um,
that whole structure of that effort in Europe and Eastern Europe. Uh, I have a quote that I found from Reuters in 2007, and Bush said, he said of the U.S. intelligence that it had concluded that with continued foreign assistance, I'm just reading verbatim what it says here. Iran could have an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the United States and all of Europe before 2015. So Bush's quote on that is, we need to take it seriously now. Today, we have no way to defend Europe against the emerging Iranian threat. And so we must deploy a missile defense system there that can. Okay. And what we're talking about there, we're talking about, I think, Poland. We're talking about on the border of Russia. Okay. So, from the perspective of Russians, look, if the Russians were doing that, and we've heard Ron Paul talk about this, if
right.
they were doing this in Mexico, we wouldn't be happy about this kind of
Right.
stuff happening on our border, right? As Americans, and or in Canada or anywhere near us. But it's
And
like
especially when they're
incrementalism.
lying.
It's like frog boiling. It's the same thing well, it's not the same thing, but it's like inflationary, Keynesian inflationary system, right? It's incremental, so you don't. It continues to happen. It's subversive though, and
The thing is, they're lying, and everybody knows they're lying. And I never could find this anymore, but I still like talking about it because, damn it, I still remember. And boy, I looked everywhere. If anybody knows where this is, email me. But when Bush first announced that these missiles were to protect Poland from Iran, the room busted up laughing. I'm pretty sure it was at a G7 meeting or G8 meeting. And everybody just started laughing because they couldn't help themselves. I remember we talked about this on my radio show at the time, that it was so funny. And how then years later we joked about how when Obama said it, everyone's like, yes, that's really smart and whatever, because you're not supposed to laugh at Barack Obama. It was the same stupid crap. Um, and then meanwhile, like in your quote just now, oh, they're going to have three-stage missiles by 9 years ago, huh? And how'd that work out? Yeah, it didn't happen at all. And they're not making nuclear weapons. They still don't have a single atom bomb in Iran because they never tried to make a single one. We're
but
talking
this
about
is an
1940s
excuse to be on the
technology here,
border
folks.
of Russia. This
Yeah.
is really where we're going, right?
Okay.
And yeah.
However, so let's get into this a little bit because
Mhm.
Vladimir Putin says, look, Bush, you're putting these anti-missile missiles all around my country. It looks like maybe you're trying to achieve a first strike capability against me. Which means, in other words, if we can launch a first strike and we're certain that we have enough defensive missiles surrounding us that we can shoot down any retaliatory launch that they are still able to get away with, then that means that we think we can start a war, hit them with a first strike, shoot down any remaining missiles, and get away with it scot-free, which completely changes the balance of power from mutually assured destruction to we think we can get away with it, which is totally different. And it changes their position to the itchiest trigger finger that ever existed, because we're forcing them to be that paranoid, right? Does that make sense?
Sure.
That's the first strike capability, changing from mad to first strike capability. But then Bush says, come on, Vlad. That doesn't make any sense, friend, because listen, we don't have enough Sparrow anti-missile missiles in these launchers to shoot down a salvo from you guys. We told you. This is about the Ayatollah, man. I know that sounds crazy to you, but let's get real. If you were to launch hundreds and hundreds or thousands of nuclear missiles at Europe, these meager installations in Romania and Poland are not enough to shoot down even a small percentage of those. So obviously that's not what they're intended for. And then Putin said, you know what, Bush, you make a good point, but I still don't believe your crap about Iran. So maybe it's not about ringing us with defensive missiles to shoot down our retaliatory response. Maybe it's the fact that those MK-41 or Mark 41 missile launchers are dual use launchers that can not only hold Sparrows, but can also hold Tomahawk cruise missiles that can be tipped with H-bombs. Maybe that's what you're really trying to do here. And Bush says, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. We would never dream of such a thing. And by the way, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty forbids it, except that installing those launchers was absolutely at least in violation of the spirit of the thing and maybe the letter, depending on how you read it. And then Trump went ahead and tore up that treaty. And you know how the Americans are with their treaties and their agreements. They break them whenever they feel like. And so now we don't have the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty anymore. And so now it would be perfectly legal for the Americans to reinstall short and or medium range nuclear missiles in Europe, where they haven't been since Reagan banned them. Reagan and Gorbachev banned them back in 1987.
Doesn't Trump have a bit of a
the worst thing that
strategy with
Donald
that?
Trump ever did in his life, by the way, was
Sure.
tear up that treaty.
I mean, and then there was the Open Skies Treaty as well.
Yeah, that's another one. It's not
Yeah.
as important, but it is important. This is the one that it sounds counterintuitive to right-wing patriots at first. Like, what do you mean allow the Russians overflight rights over the United States? But they're unarmed military planes, and their purpose is to reassure the other side that we're not mobilizing for nuclear war. And for our side, and listen, everybody knows we got them way overmatched in terms of satellite capability. We can watch every square inch of their country. We don't need to fly over their country with planes, really. But they don't have nearly the space capability that we do. And so it was really gave them a bit of an advantage. Now, if you're just two-dimensional in your thinking, you go, well, we should take that away from them. And that's what Trump did. He tore that treaty up. But no, man, we want them to always be able to reassure themselves that we are not preparing a sneak nuclear attack on them. What if they get it wrong? What if they get afraid? What if they misunderstand a signal or a tarot card reading or some stupid computer button starts
Some
blinking
kid in
on
a war
color?
games
That's
scenario.
right. We need them to be able to easily double and triple check the information that's coming in. Is this really right? Are they really mobilizing for war? What's going on at the major air bases in Missouri? What's going on at the major air bases in Washington State? What the hell is going on in Idaho and Nebraska and Colorado right now and the Dakotas with the silos? Do we see activity or don't we? And we Americans, we want Russian pilots radioing home that everything looks fine here, boss. Right? We don't want them to make that mistake. Imagine a nuclear war starts because of a misunderstanding. We're trying to prevent that at least, for God's sake, man. But they go, nah, see, this is a place where we have an advantage against them, so tear it right up. You know, it's really a shame the way that they do it. And Trump talks a game about wanting peace, but he's just belligerent by nature. He surrounded himself with belligerent hawks again. Tulsi Gabbard is the only one who is truly committed to trying to make peace with Russia, but she's no diplomat. She's going to be the director of national intelligence. She'll be able to tell him what the truth is. And if he asks, she'll be able to give him advice. But her job isn't really to be a major policy advisor. And nor, I guess, will she be.
It does seem like he is open to listening, and he's teachable. It seems that way, you know, because
she
of
is
the
good on
mistakes
Russia.
that he made.
I'll give her that. She's not good on everything, but she is good on Russia.
Well, she's a Russian agent, according to the mainstream media and the left.
That,
you know, of course. Yeah, the establishment, they've got that nailed. They're right on everything.
Hey, can I rant and rave about that for 1 second?
I would
Let me
love
tell you
love
something.
to hear about it. Yeah.
Anybody who's watching the news right now sees Al Qaeda, sponsored by Turkey and Israel, and wink, wink, obviously, clearly America is in on it,
Mhm.
seizing Aleppo and Homs and threatening Damascus. And you might wonder, what in the world am I living in where you're telling me Bill Clinton did this stuff in Bosnia? Fine. But after September 11th, we're still doing this stuff? Yes.
Mhm.
And what it really comes down to is if you go back 10 years, Obama did this exact same thing, backing the bin Ladenites in Syria against the government there because the government is run by Alawites who are very close to the Shiites, let's say. They're sort of a break off, sort of closely tied to the Shiites and clearly friends with the Shiites, protectors of the Shiites, as well as the Christians and the broader Sunni Muslim Arab population of the country as well. It's a, a secular dictatorship in a very multi-religious society that demands one. And
Mhm.
these jihadists, they're just nothing but a bunch of bin Ladenites. So why would Obama do that? It ain't because he's a secret Muslim terrorist born in Kenya. It ain't that. He's W. Bush. And W. Bush is the one who started it. W. Bush started, it wasn't the change didn't come with the administrations. It was about a little more than halfway through Bush. His advisors came to him and they said, "We really screwed up, boss. Like, can we whisper to you that, like, we just gave Baghdad to Tehran, who we hate? It wasn't supposed to be that way. We were supposed to have dominance over the Iraqi Shiites, and they were going to make the Iranians jealous of true democracy, and they were going to break Hezbollah away from Iran over there in Lebanon too, and all this, all crack pipe dreams, man. Never going to happen. Did not happen. In other words, Iraq War II was a massive failure, and they internalized the truth of that by 0506, and they launched a project called the Redirection. The Shiites are the enemy. And if we just put Baghdad in their column, well, that's tough, but it's time to shift back to the Sunnis now. And that's all of the Gulf Cooperation Council, right? That's so nominally includes Israel, the Jewish state, but then Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, and then all of the Gulf, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Yemen, right? These are all American sock puppet states there. Bahrain is majority Shiite, but it's ruled by a Sunni king, so that doesn't count. And um, and so this is the
Explain
alliance
explain
system.
Sunnis and Shiites for people
Well,
that don't understand.
basically, it comes down to you choose your own local imam or you follow the descendants of Muhammad and his son-in-law or whatever. So the
But
Shiites,
politically, from a political standpoint.
from a political standpoint, the
Mhm.
Shiites are Iran, or in other words, Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Not all of Beirut, really, not Lebanon, but southern Lebanon where the Shiites live, and now including the Houthi government in Yemen as well. So that's the political division. Is
Mhm.
when I say Sunnis, think Saudi kings. Shiites think the Ayatollah in Iran, right? So
Thank
America's
you.
on the side of the Sunnis, but dumb W. Bush gave Baghdad to the Shiites. So they've been trying to make up for that ever since. And that's why Obama backed the Osama bin Ladenite head chopping suicide bombers in the Syria war 10 years ago. And that's why Joe Biden's backing them now. That's why Israel and Turkey are backing them in Syria now. So when Americans look at what's going on there, you wonder, why in the world are we doing this? It's because they're trying to clean up the mess that they made the last time. And and because Israel has so much power and influence, and Saudi too, especially Israel has so much power and influence over our government that they can just lay down essentially the public relations line, that they won't make the direct comparison, but the line is, we hate Hezbollah more. It doesn't matter. They're not the ones that knocked our towers down. Hezbollah, they're the Shiites that rule southern Lebanon. They don't mess with us. Sort of proto Hezbollah bombed the barracks, the Marine barracks in 1983. But you know what? The Israelis knew it was going to happen and refused to warn us. So that one's a wash. Sorry.
Mhm.
And the source for that is By Way of Deception by Viktor Ostrovsky. If anyone wants to read that horror show of a book about how much Israel hates the United States of America, it's disgusting. But anyway, so Hezbollah wants no beef with us. They don't want to fight us. I mean, imagine you're them. What are you gonna do? Take on Uncle Sam? Give me a break, dude. We bombed them off the face of the earth with one B-52. They don't want that mess. They didn't knock our towers down. They're the ones who killed the bin Ladenites when they're at war in Syria. Hezbollah does. But our government, under essentially Israeli influence, would have us hate the Shiites more and attack Iran and their friends more. In other words, our government's regional rivals, as opposed to the American people's actual deadly enemies who shed the blood of thousands of our countrymen. It's completely crazy. Oh, and then here's why I'm ranting about this. Because who's Tulsi Gabbard? Well, Tulsi Gabbard is a major in the Army Reserve, is who she is. She's an Army officer. She was in Iraq War II, stationed at Balad Air Base north of Baghdad. The guys that she saw dying in front of her had been wounded to death by the Sunni-based insurgency tied to Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda in Iraq, as we called them then, the Zarqawiites, the head choppers, the suicide bombers. Now, just a few years later, they're telling her, no, these are our heroes now. Yesterday's Al-Qaeda in Iraq are today's heroic moderate rebel Al-Qaeda in Iraq in Syria, where we hate the Shiites more because that's what Israel wants. And she's as Zionist as could be, but she ain't that Zionist where she's going to all of a sudden support literal ass bin Ladenites just because they hate not even a Shiite theocrat, but a secular dictator in a three-piece suit who's friends with Shiite theocrats. Like, no way, pal. and Kurt, this is the same thing with Mike Flynn. General Mike Flynn. He was head of intelligence for the Delta Force, hunting and killing bin Ladenites in Iraq War II. That was the job. Now they're telling him, no, these are moderate rebels and we like them in Syria. And he's going, harumph, dude, no. And Mike Flynn is a hawk, dude. He hates the Shiites. He wants to bomb Tehran. He co-wrote a book with Michael Ledeen about how Iran is the center of all evil in the world. But dude, back bin Ladenites against their friends in Syria? No. Let's just bomb Tehran then. Why you got to commit high treason just to spite the Ayatollah? Can't you just bomb the Ayatollah without helping Osama bin Laden's men make gains on the ground somewhere else? It's crazy. And that's why they hate Tulsi Gabbard, is because what they were doing, it wasn't just treasonous. It was batshit schizophrenia, out of your mind, PCP nuts. And she was saying, this is crazy and I won't go along with it. It's wrong. And there's no way in the world. And then, but they couldn't understand. They're like, how could you betray the moderate rebels who are facing down the dictator? Because that's all they know is their own stupid narrative. They don't even know what they're doing. They only know their own public relations at the time that they're trying to implement this policy, which might have something to do with the fact that the implementation of their policies never works out. They never know what they're doing. They never follow through. They never seem to want to admit to themselves what they're even actually up to.
Well, I would love to talk more, and we actually pre-interview talked about some other topics that we might have podcasts on.
Sure.
Love to have you back. The book is Provoked. Go to scotthorton.org. One last thing, let's give a shout out to our favorite congressman. 2014, he came out and said that Crimea voted, when Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine, he said, what are we doing? We have no reason to be involved there. He called the sanctions that Obama put on Ukraine and Russia criminal. And he predicted where we are today with
the great Ron
this
Paul
situation. He's unbelievable.
My book is called that. I have a book that's literally called The Great Ron Paul.
If you want that book, go to scotthorton.org. It's on the front page right there. If you want to see the Libertarian Institute, for people that don't know who you are, and hopefully we're reaching those people with the audience that we have at randpaulreview.com. But, go over to scotthorton.org, buy the book Provoked, buy it through your website. Can they go to Amazon, or what's the...
Yes, sir. Yeah, if you stop by scotthorton.org, I'll get an extra little kickback from the link there. But otherwise, it's at Amazon and paperback and Kindle right now.
Scotthorton.org is the way to... Yeah.
Oh, by the way, it will be a podcast series. People keep asking about the audio. It's going to be an extremely long podcast series and you'll be able to sign up for that at scotthortonshow.com. And that'll be coming soon.
Really?
My guy is doing the mastering on the H.W. Bush chapter now.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, thanks for your time, and let's do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Kurt. Good to talk to you again.
You're a fucking genius.